Steve Friend is an FBI whistleblower who tried to warn us all about the prosecution of January 6 defendants, and he was punished for that. He tells the story in his book, True Blue, My Journey from Beat Cop to Suspended FBI Whistleblower. He joins us today to discuss reform inside the FBI, which seems to be forthcoming with the appointment of Kash Patel as the new leader of the FBI. Thank you, sir, so much for joining us, first-time Redacted guest.
Oh, thank you very much for having me today. It's an honor.
Yes, the pleasure is all mine. So why don't you give us maybe your knee-jerk reaction to the appointment of Kash Patel and why you think the FBI is in such bad need of reform?
Well, Kash Patel is the man for the moment at this point, in my humble opinion. He is really the only chance we have of avoiding a full dissolution, a demolition of the agency, shattering it to 1,000 pieces and scattering it to the winds. And I think he brings a unique perspective that even people who are advocating for him are overlooking. And first and foremost, he was a public defender at a local and federal level, which I think gives him a very unique perspective. Historically, they are appointments that go into the FBI directorship are people who are career prosecutors. Kash actually has seen both sides of that, and I think he appreciates the justice system and how people can be really wrung through it and make the process the punishment. And that's really ultimately what was the genesis of my coming forward with my concerns, that the FBI makes the process the punishment. It's gotten away from its prime directive, and that being the process. Victory is in following the process. You gather the facts and present them, and then the jury has its say. Guilty or innocent, it doesn't matter. As long as you follow the process, that's the prime directive of the government. But now the FBI wants the outcome. They're putting their thumb, if not their entire arm, on the scale of justice, and that's just not in keeping with the oath of office that I swore back in 2014. So as far as reforms go, Kash, in my communications with him, has been extremely amenable to suggestions, particularly as they pertained to the intelligence apparatus, the intelligence collection that's gone on, and then to me specifically, the integrated program management protocols that the FBI uses, which is a quota system. The number of cases that they have to open and arrests that they have to have and the tools that they have to use, which turns law enforcement on its head because you elect the sheriff to bring crime down, but because of its quota system, the FBI is incentivized to bring crime up, and they're looking at the American people as targets of opportunity rather than the citizens who they're supposed to be protecting against fraud and force.
One of the things you had spoken out against was the prosecution of January 6 defendants. And you were saying, if I violate their civil rights because I just want these guys, because I'm told to want them, then I'm going to blow up my whole case. We're not actually using due process. Can you tell me more about that and what you saw?
Well, before I was reassigned off of child pornography cases to work on the January 6 cases, I'd worked on Indian reservations for about 7 years. So I opened about 200 cases as an FBI agent, which is a huge volume. I got a lot of repetitions, and I know the pitfalls that you run into when you're bringing a case forward to prosecution. You want to be really buttoned up. And it was immediately apparent to me that specifically to the January 6 cases, the FBI departed from its practices for how it manages cases, and it was doing it to manipulate the crime statistics, the terrorist statistics, to create the false impression that terrorists are all around the country. And look, away from the politics of it, if there is a righteous prosecution that needs to happen, we need to be buttoned up, and the FBI, in my experience, was not following those protocols, was not handing that information over to the defense as they are supposed to do in following with due process. If I departed from rules for evidence tape, let's say, and I used the wrong color, I would have to document that and hand it over to the defense so that they could ask me, well, Agent Friend, you messed up on the color of the evidence tape. Did you potentially mess up somewhere else? That is all part of the process, and the FBI didn't do that. So I voiced that concern, and obviously the FBI disagreed with my sentiments on that. Look, I swore my oath. I was serious about it. I got training by going to the Holocaust Memorial and going to the MLK Memorial and learning that just following orders is never appropriate. So I brought those concerns forward. And on top of that, the final concern that I had was the safety issue. The FBI was sending SWAT teams to arrest individuals who had been interviewed, who had expressed to them that they would cooperate fully. And then because of the unique nature that they were approaching January 6th, they weren't recontacted for a year and a half. And then it was decided we're sending a SWAT team to arrest someone with no expectation that we were coming to his door. And to me, being a guy who did SWAT for 5 years, that was an unnecessary use of that tool.
Now, one thing you said in your 2023 congressional testimony was that mission creep within national security has refocused counterterrorism towards political opponents. So counterterrorism, we normally think of as something that looks abroad, but now it's refocused on Americans and American citizens. And that's something that you warned about. So this seems indicative of what you just said, is that now there's this narrative that terrorists are domestic, right? Is that an appropriate read?
This is the evolution of the mission creep post 9/11. So 9/11 happens, military goes overseas to break things, kill people, and hurt feelings, and they do a great job. The FBI is the sentry on the wall to look inward, but there weren't a lot of terrorist actors there. So they started as a bureaucracy to look for work, to create work for themselves. It's a self-licking ice cream cone. So they evolved into homegrown violent extremism, which were Muslim Americans or recent immigrants who, if looking historically back, many of them were entrapped. And then that evolved into domestic violent extremism. And that was the label that so many of the moms at school board meetings or people who flew a Gadsden flag outside their house were getting from the FBI. And now we have the new evolution, which is the agave, the anti-government, anti-authority violent extremist. And that's been around for a couple of years. It hasn't really gotten into the public lexicon. But the FBI authored a strategic intelligence assessment a couple of years ago, and they said that an agave is someone who has a perception of government overreach or negligence. That's all that's required for them to look at you as a potential domestic terrorist. So now they've essentially, there's 56 guys who signed a Declaration of Independence that I think would fall in the crosshairs of a domestic terrorist investigation. And the FBI is basically setting up its own protocols, its own definitions, so that it can go after people for their First Amendment protected activity.
Right. Now, one of the things I'm noticing online is how key investigators from the Mueller investigation seem very nervous about the appointment of Kash Patel, specifically Andrew Weissman, who was one of the lead prosecutors in the Mueller investigation, said that Kash Patel does not have the experience and gravitas to lead the government, the preeminent federal agency in America with 30,000 plus employees, to keep us safe from terrorists and child predators. Well, that's very interesting because you just said that he does, in fact, have the experience and the gravitas. And so do you think because Kash Patel was so integral in what's called Objective Medusa, which was an effort to uncover collusion against President Trump by the Obama White House, the Clinton campaign, the Department of Justice, and the FBI, that there are people who are going to be very nervous for cooperating with that?
Well, let's just set this aside. So the argument is that Kash Patel, because he uncovered corruption at the hands of the federal government and the intelligence apparatus against a presidential candidate and eventually a president himself, that makes him unqualified or a political actor. When you have to go back to, I don't know, James Comey, who sent agents to go and entrap Mike Flynn, James Comey, who sent undercover agents to use a honey trap in the Trump campaign. Off the books investigation. That's a political act. You had his successor, Andy McCabe, who headed up the Crossfire Hurricane investigation, which went after Donald Trump. And then his successor, Christopher Wray, which has seen the FBI spying on moms at school board meetings or investigating people who bought the Bible. This is a politicized agency, and Kash Patel's track record and his history is that he's rooted out corruption and called it out for what it is. I think that makes him eminently qualified to take the reins here.
Okay. Thank you for that. Yeah, I think it's just very interesting because of his participation in Objective Medusa, which I don't know if you've realized this, but if you Google it, it will tell you about a Canadian mission and not at all about this counterterrorism mission that was headed by Devin Nunes and Kash Patel. That's interesting, don't you think? So people seem to want to disqualify that because it turned out favorable for the narrative that President Trump had warned us about. So before I let you...
The fact that the FBI is now colluding with big tech under Christopher Wray's leadership is supporting the fact that you can't find anything about Operation Medusa. So you should probably read Plot Against the President by Lee Smith or Kash's book, Government Gangsters.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely right. Thank you for that. So before I get you out of here, because you're well-versed in corruption inside the FBI and the Justice Department, would you like to give me some kind of reaction to the Hunter Biden pardon?
I'm going to go be a little bit contrarian on this one. I know there's a lot of outrage and a lot of calls about hypocrisy, which is probably the most Republican things that Republicans do. But that doesn't impact the communists. The communist is nothing but scar tissue and being called a hypocrite. It was always going to happen. I think that this is an opportunity for the mutually assured destruction that we have to have here, where there needs to be lawfare against the communists in this country, very much like they put President Trump through. And there needs to be preemptive pardons. I think President Trump should preemptively pardon every single one of his political nominees so that they can operate as they're being called to do, to be disruptive without fear of when a Pharaoh who comes in and knows not Joseph, when the other side gets power, that they're not going to face similar lawfare. So now the precedent's been set. The toothpaste is out of the tube. Let's use this to our advantage.
Now, having worked on January 6th defendants, it seems something Mike Benz, former State Department and cybersecurity expert, said is that it seems now, okay, January 6 pardons would be a no-brainer since Biden has used the pardoned such that maybe this will happen for January 6th. What do you think of that?
We need blanket pardons across the board, and I realize that that involves people who were unsavory characters who engaged in activity that was illegal. But the fact of the matter is, and I'm back to follow the process. The FBI departed from the process, and they should forfeit the outcomes here. And the example that I always point to is Bill Cosby. That didn't involve the FBI, but it involved law enforcement. Bill Cosby drugged and sexually assaulted numerous women. And then in behind closed doors had conversations with prosecutors where they assured him that nothing he said would be used against him. He took them at their word, and then they violated that. And as a result, Bill Cosby walked free, and those women didn't see justice. And that was the fault of the government. The government's prime directive is to follow the process, and they did not do so for January 6th.
Okay. Thank you so much for your opinion about this. I really appreciate it. You can find, again, Steve Friend's book called True Blue, My Journey from Beat Cop to Suspended FBI Whistleblower. It's really very enlightening, so seek it out. Thank you for coming on Redacted. Please come back anytime.
Thank you very much.